After my previous video about upgrading my soldered laptop GPU, I couldn't stop thinking about the missed opportunity to solder in the biggest of the RTX 30 laptop lineup, the RTX 3080 Ti Mobile. So let's change that. I originally wanted to skip the 3080 Ti because getting a donor board with it soldered on was quite rare and unreasonably expensive on sources like eBay. So I started looking on AliExpress and found a few sources where I could buy the GPU core only, either used or in, well, new condition. But here's the thing, on AliExpress you can never be sure if you're really getting factory new items or just refurbished ones. It is not a promise, just a statement, especially with Nvidia GPU cores. They are usually sold in large quantities directly to board partners only, not to individual customers. However, I've bought some items from some well-rated shops on AliExpress before and wasn't disappointed. So I thought I would give it a try. Well, an expensive try for sure. I chose a core that was described as new. And got this. If it really is new is impossible to tell, but the reflections of the bare die showed no scratches except for the slightly curved polishing marks from the wafer polishing process. All in all, this one looks very promising. Now, this GPU came with lead-free solder balls, which is totally fine. I could have soldered this chip right in, but I decided to go with leaded solder balls once again. Why? Well, I hope that this nice looking GPU might be a golden sample which can overclock well. And I wonder if the extended thermal stress during soldering could reduce the GPU's clock stability. So I wanted to play it safe and use solder balls that melt at just 183 degrees C instead of the typical 217 degrees C. But I could be totally wrong with this assumption. So this step is highly optional and not based on any knowledge. Nevertheless, let's go through the reballing process. At first, I had to remove the old solder. To make things easier, I used a blob of leaded solder and mixed it with the old solder. This way, you lower the melting temperature, which makes it easier to remove the solder from the GPU pads afterwards. Of course, I use a lot of flux to make the solder flow. Otherwise, it would not want to stick and just stay where it is. The actual cleaning is done with some strips of desoldering wick. I took my time with the cleaning process and repeated the steps until the desoldering wick wasn't picking up any solder from the chip anymore. Then I cleaned off the old flux with isopropyl alcohol. Now we come to the most critical part, which is applying the right amount of flux and new solder balls. Just one day earlier I practiced with my old desoldered RTX 3070 mobile from my previous video and managed to get it done on the first try without any solder bridges. This was only possible because I followed some hints on various forums and Discord servers, which even showed up in my comments. The balls don't move as much if the flux is heated up a bit before the balls get added. So I added the right amount of flux and then heated it up until the flux started to flow, smoothing out any bumps and gaps. You can also see it getting more evenly distributed in the reflections. Now I put the stencil on the BGA reballing tool, poured some solder balls in and made sure there was one in each hole. Finally, I lifted the stencil and carried the GPU carefully to the mini heating plate. But this time without dropping it. Then I heated up the GPU slowly to the solder's melting temperature and assisted the process with my cheap hot air gun on low airspeed. As you can see, the ball still shifted, but overall I had less problems than with the 3080 mobile in my previous video. Not as nice as my practice session with the old 3070 mobile core, but still not too bad. As you can see, I had two spots where one ball moved away from its pad and formed a single large solder ball with its neighbor. I made use of it and took the chance to show another technique to get rid of solder bridges. While the GPU was still hot right at the solder ball's melting temperature, I tried to drop a new solder ball onto the empty pad. The first try was successful, but I missed the second spot. Fortunately, that's a solvable problem with the help of the desoldering rig. Cut off a small piece and grab it with a pair of tweezers so that you are able to tap the oversized solder ball with one corner of the desoldering rig. Use the hot air to heat the solder balls and the rig at the same time. Of course, you need steady hands for this, so don't drink too much coffee right before reballing a GPU like I did. You may notice that I didn't rig off all the solder on this one. This was not intentional, but I noticed that there might be just the right amount of solder left to form a perfectly sized ball. Well, in the end it was not perfect because it was slightly too big, but it is okay to have a not as perfectly sized solder ball in an array of perfect ones, so I will take that. Now the solder balls look perfect, and after some cleaning in isopropyl alcohol, the chip was ready to be soldered onto its new spot. But first I had to remove the old GPU, of course. And if you have seen my previous video, you might wonder how in the world there was another RTX 3070 GPU in my laptop. Which I need to remove again? What? Well, I got two of these laptops. One for daily use and one exclusively for this YouTube channel to fool around with. And since the 3080 one is working fine and I use it daily as my main laptop ever since, my old daily machine can be put to the risk. It is the same laptop, an XMG Apex Max E22, and because many of you commented on this, yes, it got an AM4 desktop CPU socket. This principle is called desktop replacement or DDR, which was fairly common with some barebone laptops from Clevo for more than a decade. But since Intel's 12th gen and AMD's Zen 4 mobile CPUs came out, their popularity dropped and are pretty much dead by now. This laptop is one of the last of its kind. There are a lot of disadvantages about DDRs as well, but that's not the topic of this video, so let's continue. Before I could take off the board, I had to remove the annoying glue spots using an underfilm remover knife and a little hot air. Finally, I removed the GPU with my sheepish BGA rework station, which is a modified LY-IR 8500 with external temperature probes attached to flexible arms. It does the job, but it is rumored to discolorize the GPU a little compared to much more expensive machines. This might be true, but I am not experienced enough to really judge about that. My machine's temperature target settings for lead-free solder are usually 180 degrees C on the bottom and 230 degrees C on the top, right at the edge of the chip. Some seconds before reaching the target temperature, I add a little flux and tap the chip with little force until I can see it moving. Then it can be pulled off the board easily with a small vacuum pen. As usual, I cleaned off the old solder with fresh leaded solder. In preparation for the new GPU, I tried to get rid of the bigger glue spots on the board with a small grinder. On one of them I slipped and damaged the solder mask a little. Not the end of the world, but I shouldn't leave the copper traces unprotected either. So I have repaired that with the help of some UV curvable solder mask. Finally, the pads got cleaned with desoldering wick just a moment before soldering in the new chips, to make sure the pads are as clean as possible. And finally, the actual soldering is done on my BGA rework station. Those stations usually have a bottom heater and a top heater. The bottom heater is there to soak the board you are working on with heat. The top heater is noticeably weaker, but its only job is to push the chip's temperature just a little higher, right above the melting temperature of the solder balls, which is 183 degrees C in my case. For soldering in the new 16GB of video memory, I will start with the bottom heater only, set to 150 degrees C. After applying some flux, I placed the video memory ICs in a correct orientation and aligned them properly. Using my hot air station, I heated them up until they settled, which can be seen nicely in the video footage by the gap between them and the board getting smaller. While the solder is liquid, it is advised by many more experienced repair technicians to give them a little tap to support the liquid solder bonding to the pads. After all of them are soldered in, it was time for the star of the show, the freshly reballed RTX 3080 Ti Mobile. I spread some flux evenly with a brush and then aligned the GPU core as good as possible. Now the BGA rework station's top heater comes into play. The board top target temperature is set to 195 degrees C, just a little over the solder ball's melting temperature. Also, the bottom heater gets a little bump up to 170. The remaining process took just 2.5 minutes and included gentle knocks on the top of the GPU core, while the solder was liquid. This way I wanted to make sure to prevent any cold solder joints as seen in my previous video with the 3080. I think the reason for my struggles with the 3080 back then was that the laptop's mainboard was not perfectly flat, and this way at least one edge of the GPU was too far away from the board to properly bond all solder balls to the pads. That's it, the critical part is over. Now let's clean it a little and perform some final checks before reassembling the laptop. In the footage you can see some final measurements on the inductors to check for shorts. If there would be any, that would be a bad sign and indicate that there is a solder bridge or short underneath the chips. But nothing was wrong here and all resistances were looking perfectly fine. And as a last step before assembly, I have to change the straps as explained in the last video. But this time we aim for the strap combination high-high-low to tell the GPU it has 16GB of Samsung 16GB per second memory installed. And finally, I assembled the laptop quickly with some cheap thermal pads and thermal paste for a simple test run. But again, I got no image. Well, I was a little too quick apparently, because I realized that I forgot to plug in the laptop screen cable. And the webcam, but who cares. After fixing this, the final moment came. But again, just kidding. I got an image on the first try, and that's really amazing. No troubleshooting required this time. After all this work, I ran a ton of benchmarks at different GPU power targets. To be precise, more than 80 runs of 3D Mark Port Royal and more than 100 runs of TimeSpy. For reference, here are the graphs of the 3080 mobile upgrade video. On the x-axis you can find the TGP or power limit values, and on the y-axis the resulting performance. As usual, the higher the power limit is set, the higher the performance. Now let's add the 3080 Ti mobile and start with the 3D Mark Port Royal benchmark, just as in the previous video. As you can see, the 3080 Ti does perform a little better than the 3080, but just by a very small margin of 3 to 4% in the mid-TGP range, maxing out at 5.5% performance advantage at the very top 175W TGP. On the lowest end, however, the 3080 Ti mobile is much slower than the 3080 mobile, being even slower than the 3070 mobile. Well, up to 5% over the 3080 mobile is not too bad, but unfortunately that's just true for ray tracing enabled benchmarks. This time I also included some 3D Mark TimeSpy results, which is not using the ray tracing cores of the GPU, but only classic rasterization. And oh boy, the 3080 Ti mobile is bad. Clearly it is gaining performance on the top end, but it can never really exceed the 3080 by a noticeable margin. The data shows that the 3080 Ti mobile can't take advantage of its 20% higher multiprocessor count over the 3080 mobile. It is much beefier in the specs, but it can't show its full potential unless you allow it to draw a lot of power. I would even say this GPU cries for power, just as seen with Ampere generation's high-end desktop GPUs like the RTX 3090 Ti. But to be honest, I really can't tell you what might be the reason for its underwhelming performance. I can think of multiple possible reasons, such as an architectural bottleneck or something with the GA103, which might be the reason Nvidia never really used that die in their product stack. There are a lot of graphics cards with the GA104 and GA102, but the GA103 is quite rare. Or maybe it is the relatively small level 2 cache, despite having a lot of multiprocessors. Another reason might be the relatively low clock voltage curve compared to the 3080 mobile. It looks like it falls off at the, for laptops, very crucial low end. Or maybe it is even the weird video memory clock behavior with a lot of fluctuations, while the 3080 mobile shows a perfectly flat line. I honestly just don't know, but after all my test runs it feels like a weird product, which I think should perform better when you look at its raw specs. You can see the relatively low performance in laptop reviews as well, when you filter out any potential CPU bottlenecked benchmarks and concentrate on the more GPU-bound 4K performance results. I mean, it is faster in most situations at the highest TGP, but all in all, it is not worth it when you would have to pay more money on a 3080 Ti mobile over a just as fast 3080 mobile. However, when it comes to use gaming laptops, then sure, I would probably opt for the 3080 Ti mobile, but just because it usually came with a much faster 12th gen Intel CPU compared to Intel's 11th gen. If you are more interested in my hunt for the unexpected low performance, come visit my blog at techmodlab.com and take a closer look at some more graphs. If you got anything to add or some ideas what might be wrong, you're welcome to write down your thoughts in the comment section. I was not planning to talk too much about overclocking in this video, but the strange performance in 3DMark TimeSpy triggered my curiosity and I asked myself the question, what if the clock voltage curve is too low for all 3080 Ti mobile GPUs and should match the one from the 3080 mobile instead? Well, I ran some quick tests and found the performance to be much more reasonable. In the end, it performed noticeably better in the mid TGP range, but it does not change too much about the overall situation. It is still much weaker on the low and just a little better on the high end. In terms of individual overclocking stability, I can report that my 3080 Ti mobile is overclocking exceptionally well, with it being able to run plus 255 on the core in benchmarks and plus 210 in games. My 3080 mobile is not an as good sample, maxing out at plus 150 in benchmarks and plus 105 in games, as an all-time stable overclock. However, overclocking does vary a lot from GPU to GPU. I'm sure there are 3080 mobile GPUs out there which can reach plus 250 on the core without crashing as well. So, without comparing hundreds of the same GPU with each other, I really can't say if there's any clock-related problem leading to low performance. I want to do a proper overclocking session with both GPUs in one of my next videos. Maybe I can find some more clues as to what might be causing this suspiciously underwhelming performance until then. Just as in my previous video, I can conclude that it is still not worth to go through all that work to upgrade your laptop's GPU. If you want an upgrade, it is better to buy a newer laptop and sell your old one. After all, this modification is not easy at all, and I can't recommend to do it without the right tools and some experience with BGA rework. If you want to gain some, well, as I said in my previous video, I can recommend to start with desktop GPU repairs. After all, this YouTube channel is about computer mods and I really hope I can inspire some of you out there to get into these topics. For all the others, well, I hope it's just enjoyable and interesting to watch. For myself, however, it is purely about the curiosity and fun, of course. And I think I have proven that it is possible to do it yourself. But again, I can't stress this enough. Of course, it is a super hard modification that only a very small percentage would ever consider to learn for themselves. In the end, I got two beautiful unicorn laptops here that never existed in that configuration, and I'm more than happy to play around with them until the next major hardware upgrade. By the way, I will not swap another GPU core in the next video. Yet. Of course, I'm already thinking about a part 3. I got some crazy ideas what I can still do, even if the 3080 Ti Mobile is the biggest GPU this laptop is natively compatible with. But I need to investigate my plans a little further to make sure it works, so stay tuned. But for now, I will concentrate on some other mods. Also thinking about making a Q&A video about all your questions. So don't hesitate to put your questions into the comment section down below. And as always, that's it for this video. Nothing more to say than thanks for watching.